I mean, we got the Giannis deal, we got the LaMelo deal, and Jaylen Brown is still in Boston. And we don't know where Jaylen Brown is going to go. It's kind of funny, like for all the talk about Giannis, it was so open, Boston or Miami. We knew the mystery teams. We knew all the names. As soon as LaMelo was announced last night by Shams as being involved in trade conversations, we knew the names. We knew Minnesota. We knew Toronto. Even this morning, it was reported that Milwaukee, very interestingly, inquired about LaMelo. With Jaylen Brown, there's not a lot of clarity with who the Jaylen Brown teams are. There's been no definitive reporting around Houston or Atlanta or New Orleans or any of these teams that you would assume have interest in Jaylen Brown. And I just find that very, very interesting. Do you think it's because perhaps there's nothing that's getting a lot of traction, or is this more that Boston tends to keep things very, very quiet? Or could it be that Boston is trying to work to influence Jaylen Brown to want to stay? What's your gut say about what's going on behind the scenes right now with Jaylen Brown?
I think it's his contract. Honestly, it's not that you're getting Jaylen Brown. It's that you're owing him $57 million next season, and then $61 in the following season, and $65 in 28-29 season. For the next 3 years, you're paying him like like an MVP candidate. And yes, in all things came together last season, and he was in that range of a fringe MVP candidate. But if you're acquiring him at this point in his career, you got to believe that you're getting a guy that's going to be MVP at the top of that list for a while. When you're talking about the contract and the fact that, the on-court, off-court splits last year for Boston, Celtics fans hated when we were talking about it all last year, but it's a big reason why I didn't have him first team All-NBA on my list or second team All-NBA. It's because I thought a lot of the things that Jaylen Brown was getting credit for and carrying, quote unquote, carrying the Boston Celtics, a lot of the metrics and just plain win-loss record when he was off the floor, the Celtics were a really great team still when Jaylen Brown wasn't playing. And so I think some teams are looking at those on-off splits and looking at the contract that's coming down the pipe for Jaylen Brown and wondering, is it really worth it to put in the assets that Boston is going to be acquiring or asking for? So I think the gut tax that you have when you're getting Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think it's much easier to trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo because he's a 2-time MVP, defensive player of the year candidate when he's healthy. I don't think you have the same upside with Jaylen Brown. I think the upside is much lower for Jaylen Brown, but he's going to be paid more than just about every player in the NBA over the next 3 seasons. So I think a lot of teams are probably looking at the asking price of Brad Stevens and the Boston Celtics and saying, I'm going to pass. I think that's why you are not hearing talks getting further down the road here, is that I think it's just, I think the asking price for a Jaylen Brown is probably quite high. And then for a team, is that contract going to be prohibitive, or is it something that teams are going to want on their books?
I mean, of the little things that have really leaked out about, why teams might be not as in on him, that is part of it. I had heard with Atlanta, this was during the earlier stages of the Giannis trade talks. I had heard that Atlanta isn't like as in on Jaylen Brown as people think that they would be because of the Georgia connection and all that, and the need for a guy like Jaylen Brown. But the reason is because with 3 years left on his contract at a very high price point, and the idea of what that next salary is going to look like after 3 years, which would take him into his mid-late 30s at a still significant price point, there's teams concerned about that next contract, Atlanta included. That's not to say that Atlanta wouldn't trade for him, but I think there's a price where there'd be a comfortability in saying, okay, this is worth it for us. I mean, we haven't gotten any clarity over Houston. Our coworker, Kelly Eco, reported on Yahoo Sports that he doesn't believe that the Rockets are actually in on Jaylen Brown, despite the Ime Udoka connection from their time in Boston together and their relationship. So if that is the case, unless Houston has secret interests that they continue denying, well, that rules out Houston potentially. Could it be a team like New Orleans where they just want to become more competent? I could see that. I could see New Orleans being a team that have interest in Jaylen Brown. I know for a fact, according to my sources, that Boston has had conversations with the Pelicans for Trey Murphy. And so I could see a world in which you see Jaylen Brown land with the Pelicans. Maybe, how about, teams we're not talking about, Tom? Brian Windhorst connected the Pistons to Kawhi Leonard. What if the Pistons tried to dump all their picks to Boston for Jaylen Brown? It was a more picks heavy type of deal for Boston. Maybe Detroit, of these playoff teams that might want to take a leap. That's of the top 12 teams last year that got guaranteed playoff seeds. I think Detroit it comes to mind, but it's really hard to find a playoff team that would want a guy making that level of money and has assets to give up that would appease Boston.
In a few years ago, when Kyrie Irving was with Cleveland and they traded him for Isaiah Thomas, people were shocked that the Boston Celtics would trade Isaiah Thomas in a deal right to a contender, one of their rivals in the Eastern Conference. And so now do the Boston Celtics make a similar deal with either, if it's Cleveland or Detroit, two teams that are very desperate to get over the hump and they get a finals MVP out of it? That's, for Detroit, they are certainly looking for a co-pilot for Cade Cunningham now that the Jaden Ivey thing did not work out. And you're also seeing, LaMelo Ball go to Minnesota. I think if you're Detroit, you might have to put in a couple more assets if you're going to go try to get a star level guard next to Cade Cunningham, because of the fact that LaMelo Ball is now off the board for them. So potentially, I think some people might say, hey, Boston can't trade Jaylen Brown to a team that they're going to be contending against, but they've shown that they did that. They don't care about that stuff. So that's interesting, is who are the suitors for Jaylen Brown? And could it be to a team like Detroit?
Well, Chris Mannix on NBC Sports Boston earlier in the week said that he heard the Celtics had interest in Evan Mobley, which I think would be a horrific move for Boston to trade for Evan Mobley. Mobley is definitely a talented young player. Do not get me wrong. He had some good moments in the playoffs. He also had some absolute stinkers with his one rebound game, and the fact that this Cavaliers defense with a defensive player of the year in Mobley just had no identity. And that's in part due to the fact that Mobley is not a tone setter. And so I think with Evan Mobley, if he's Boston's target, if you turn Jaylen Brown into Evan Mobley with all his flaws offensively as a shooter, as a creator, the stagnation that we've seen with his development and the defensive aspect, he's talented without a doubt, but he's not an enforcer. He lacks a level of toughness. He lacks strength. I would not trade Jaylen Brown for Evan Mobley if I'm the Boston Celtics. I would much rather some type of package of Jared Allen plus Donovan Mitchell for Jaylen Brown plus whatever. I'd rather do that type of swap than trade for Evan Mobley. I would hate that for Boston, which I think speaks to what we're hitting on here, Tom, with the salary aspect that turns some teams off, the numbers. The fact Boston statistically has been better without Jaylen Brown on the floor, regardless of his individual success or regardless of the context. That's how some teams might perceive it, that maybe he's not as great as it appears on the surface with his level of production. With those aspects, plus what Boston needs back in return, that's really the biggest one here in terms of finding a match. And I do wonder if maybe there could be some team that nobody's talking about that comes out of nowhere and we see a Shams Charania notification that says he's been traded to blank and nobody saw it coming. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility here, which is why I mentioned Detroit, because Detroit is definitely up to something. And we don't know exactly what. On draft night, second night of the draft, they traded Isaiah Stewart to the Memphis Grizzlies for 3 second-round draft picks. That opened up cap flexibility for them. They can now get to over $30 million in cap space, depending on what they do with Jalen Duren and others with the cap holds on those players. So they have a lot of flexibility this offseason to play around with free agents or taking salaries in through trade. And for Detroit, they were aggressive trading up for Ibuka Okori in the first round, which I love. Downhill attacker. I think he's a great pairing with Cade Cunningham, but you're not relying on a rookie to be the only guy to support Cade Cunningham. Kawhi Leonard is the one people mentioned, Tom. Windhorst this morning on Get Up said he's a target for the Pistons, but Windhorst said, quote, I'm not even sure the NBA will allow Kawhi to be extended or traded until there's a resolution to this investigation. So if that's the case, we might not even have a Kawhi Leonard trade here unless we get a resolution there soon. But I do think Kawhi would make sense for a Pistons target, don't you think?
Oh yeah. I love Kawhi Leonard's game, but they gotta get resolution on this aspiration deal. I mean, the fact that it's taken almost a year now. I don't know what else you need to see from Pablo Torre's reporting and their internal investigations for Adam Silver to give a ruling. He says he was a month ago or a few weeks ago, he said at his press conference that they needed to wrap this up soon. And I think for the Clippers, when they get the number 5 pick and get Wagler, I think when you look at the talent that they are building and fusing, it seems like they're making a change of trying to figure out whether we're going to be a win now team anymore, or whether we're going to be hey, let's retool and try to figure out how we can get some assets to build a future under Steve Ballmer with the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard with James Harden, with Paul George, with Ivica Zubac had a much more win now feel to it. But now with the Clippers, I am very, very skeptical that they are going to keep trying to run it back and try to win a championship with this core. Seems like with Darius Garland and the change that they made with James Harden, they were making a decision that they are going to build for the future rather than now. So Kawhi Leonard, the fact that he's still a Clipper, it does suggest that maybe they're being held hostage a little bit by this aspiration investigation and that they might want to make moves, but they can't really do it until they get an announcement from Adam Silver. It's time. I would not be surprised if we do get an announcement from Adam Silver before free agency starts, because if you're the Los Angeles Clippers and you're trying to make deals through the free agency process in the transaction cycle, I can't imagine that maybe that's part of the punishment, is that you have to have Kawhi Leonard on your books and it's basically going to be a logjam for your franchise. Yeah. But I can't imagine that the Clippers are very happy that they're continuing to be underneath this investigation. And for Kawhi Leonard, I mean, you have Miami, you have Detroit, you have Golden State, you have a lot of teams that are trying to win a championship that would want to have Kawhi Leonard's services. And it's just a question of whether he's going to be available because of this aspiration thing that is still hanging over the franchise.
One of the very interesting things that happened on the second round broadcast, they were talking about Kawhi Leonard deals, and there was like this kind of weird silence when I believe it was Malika Andrews said who would be interested. And like nobody really said anything because they didn't want to get aggregated. And then Bobby Marks chimes in, maybe his former teams. Yeah. Those former teams would be San Antonio and Toronto. I can't fathom San Antonio trading for Kawhi Leonard, just given the salaries they'd have to give up. Devin Vassell was so important to them. I'd just be surprised, maybe, but I would be surprised. Toronto, on the other hand, though, I could definitely see Toronto trading for Kawhi Leonard. Brandon Ingram plus whatever it takes to go get Kawhi Leonard again with 1 year left on his deal, try to do it again, repeat history. I could see that. I could definitely see Toronto trying to go trade for Kawhi. But what did you make of that comment by Bobby Marks, Tom? And do you think San Antonio or Toronto should be in on Kawhi?
Yeah, I just don't see the front office with San Antonio, R.C. Buford, going back into the Kawhi Leonard business after how ugly that was in San Antonio. So I think you can cross off the San Antonio Spurs from that list.
Maybe they're like J-Lo and Ben Affleck. They get together again years later, and then they break it off again. Maybe that's what it is, this type of relationship. They just have some real chemistry, Tom. They just can't resist each other.
Look, man, after we saw Dan Gilbert and LeBron James reunite in Cleveland, maybe all the bets are off when it comes to those relationships you never, ever would expect after the Dan Gilbert letter. And LeBron James just said, all right, I still want to go back to Cleveland. granted, I think when Bobby Marks is saying former teams, he's really talking about the Toronto Raptors. And you can understand why the Raptors want to get in the Kawhi Leonard business given their history, but also I think in the playoffs, they didn't have that veteran leadership, and I don't think Brandon Ingram counts on this, which is also why I think the LaMelo Ball acquisition for the Minnesota Timberwolves doesn't really make much sense, because LaMelo Ball has never played in the playoffs in the NBA. And so you're asking a lot of LaMelo Ball in Minnesota as the difference maker to increase that upside to win a championship. And the same thing for the Clippers. I don't understand, if you're the Clippers, why you go for Brandon Ingram, who I think with his contract, it was best case scenario last year for Brandon Ingram and the season that he had, All-Star season. And still, I don't think that Brandon Ingram is going to move the needle for the Los Angeles Clippers. But what else? I don't think that Colin Murray-Boyles is going to be on the table for Kawhi Leonard. I don't think that Scotty Barnes is going to be on the table for Kawhi Leonard. So ultimately, what is it going to be for the Los Angeles Clippers in a deal for Toronto? But I can understand why the Raptors would want to get in the Kawhi Leonard business again, because he's as elite of a playoff performer, two-way playoff performer as you'll find. And he still, in my opinion, was 5th in the MVP vote for me last year. So if they can get Kawhi, that'd be sensational.
Yeah, and I think for Toronto, they need that end game scorer as well. And so I think for them, that's why they probably had interest in LaMelo, and because in terms of creation, end of the shot clock, ability to get a bucket, Kawhi Leonard, of course, is just a way different version of that. As a forward, he's not a guard. He's a way older than LaMelo Ball as well. But I think for the Raptors, they're a team on the up and up. I mean, like, they nearly won last year over Cleveland, despite lacking that on-ball creation in a Game 7 against the Cavaliers. If you get Kawhi Leonard as an upgrade from Brandon Ingram, I think it would elevate this team to a whole new level. There's other moves still to be made. We'll see if they bring back Mamu. We'll see if they flip Pirtle, trade him somewhere else. But with Scotty Barnes really ascending, Colin Murray-Boyles entering year 2, even Jacoby Walter, there's like so many good young players on this team that they drafted Alan Graves with the 19th pick, who I really like. RJ Barrett was excellent in the postseason last year. I think the Raptors should be, poking around and seeing if there's a veteran worth acquiring at a decent price. And for Kawhi Leonard, given his age, his injury history, and lack of a future with a contract, he's only got the 1 year remaining. It's not like it would be an enormous return to go get Kawhi Leonard like it would be to go get Jaylen Brown. I'm not sure if Jaylen Brown is worth it with where the Raptors are, but Kawhi Leonard, why not? Why not?
Can I throw another name for you with the Toronto Raptors? Rudy Gobert.
Oh, yeah, that could be a center for him. I like that. That's a great idea. Why not both? Gobert and Kawhi? Huh? Why not that?
Well, I mean, that would be wild. Kawhi and Gobert for the Toronto Raptors. But if you're looking for places for Rudy Gobert to be a defensive menace, the Toronto Raptors could use a center, and certainly they would have spacing issues. If you trade, let's say, Brandon Ingram for Rudy Gobert, that solves the 4 position for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I think both those teams, the Charlotte Hornets and the Minnesota Timberwolves, they're not done deal making. I think both of those teams are going to make one more big swing here before the transaction window concludes. I think for Toronto, Rudy Gobert as a defensive rim protector, a guy who can basically, along CMB and Scotty Barnes, that's the best defense in the NBA next season. Do they have enough shooting and playmaking outside of that to make it worthwhile? I'm sure they could figure out ways to add a point guard in that situation. I don't think IQ Emmanuel Quickley is the answer there. Jamal Shed is not a pure point guard, but defensively, if you add Rudy Gobert to Scotty Barnes and CMB, that and the Miami Heat are going to be the top contenders for the best defense in the NBA. So that's another name for Rudy Gobert is if they really are moving on from Rudy Gobert, I would imagine that the Toronto Raptors might be calling.
I could see that as well, Tom. I mean, I feel like this offseason already, just in general, Giannis Antetokounmpo getting moved to the Miami Heat, seeing LaMelo Ball go to the Minnesota Timberwolves, this is potentially going to be a massive offseason with a ton of changes, the landscape looking totally different in October compared to where it did at the end of April, at the end of the regular season. And we could see Jaylen Brown go somewhere now. We could see Kawhi go somewhere. We could see surprise deals that come out of nowhere that we're not even talking about right now. I mean, the fact even this morning, there was the reporting from the Stein line that the Bucks inquired about LaMelo Ball. I mean, there's just like these little interesting sub stories that are happening right now with teams that you wouldn't expect inquiring about players that don't necessarily fit where they are. And I think this is sort of probably the objective of Adam Silver, where he said this. He wants it to be more like the NFL, where it feels like everybody's got a chance. And I think the offseason has sort of reflected that so far, with both some of the things that have been rumored, but also some of the things that have actually happened. And so I do wonder what could be happening right now that we're not talking about. But ultimately, like, the draft happens. We had some interesting moves. We've had some big moves already. It's been a fun offseason so far, man. And like, in some ways, we really are still just getting started now. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen, because I'm already having fun, Tom. I'm having a good time already.